Wenn wir kommen und marschieren in a schönem hellen Tag, kirchen dunkele Millionen, a tausend Schaps auf Stock, Baputzeren mit Strahlen, wenn die Sonne rausgesprungen, war die Menschen Herren singen, Bräut und Reusen, Bräut und Blumen.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Radiant Others. My name is Dan Blacksburg. I'm a klezmer trombonist, composer, and teacher, recording to you from my West Philly basement. Radiant Others is where I share conversations between me and the people who make up our broader and awesome Yiddish cultural scene, our Yiddish world. Klezmer musicians, scholars, people of all backgrounds, ages, and people who are established, people who are up and coming, people who are just obsessed in the best way and totally dedicated to Yiddish culture in their own lives and by sharing it with others. I've been working in this culture now for over 20 years, first as just a student, then a performer, then someone who's leading performances, now somebody who is both doing all of those things and also trying to share what I know, what I love, getting other people to fall in love with this culture. That's why we make this podcast and share it with all of you. And the thing is, I'm still just as excited about it all as I was when I started. Just as completely different kind of excitement. That excitement has evolved and changed, but it has not diminished. And one of the reasons that I'm still so excited is because people keep coming in with new ideas, new information, a new take on some information that reminds me of something that I fell in love with but kind of moved on from or forgot about. Just lots of incredible stuff happening all the time. And this conversation and some of the conversations coming up will really feature some people who are doing that. Today I'm talking to the band Brivele. Brivele is from Seattle. They started in 2017 with a trio of Maya Brown, Stephanie Brendler, and Hannah Hamavid. Hannah has moved on from the group, and now they're a duo of Maya and Steph, and that's who you hear today. They talk about a lot of stuff, but especially their new record, which comes out on May Day, Chaverim Seid Great, Comrades, Get Ready. And it's coming out on Borscht Beat Records, and I swear we are not just a podcast that interviews Borscht Beat artists. They just happen to be the label that are putting out all the artists that we'd like to interview. And those artists are making great music. We want to hear about it. We want to share it with you. So thank you, Borscht Beat, and, we'll just keep going. In this conversation, Maya and Hannah and I talk about this new record, what it means to have made this third record now as a duo, and all the different elements that they bring as themselves, that they bring through their experience in our Yiddish world, in their own research and their own goals. We talk a little bit about what it's like to make music in this day and age, this very specific day and age of ours. And we talk about all the different elements that go into making music from our own personal histories, from our experiences, how they all come together. I really like the part where we get to talk about the folk punk element of Brivele. And you'll hear a lot about what folk punk is, how it's something specific in relationship to punk itself, which is a word, well, you'll hear. I have some opinions about how it's used in the klezmer context. But anyway, you'll hear about all that. And what's really exciting is I'm actually going to get to go hang with Brivele and see them perform at the Klez Fest in Vancouver, which is coming up right after their record release on the first weekend of May, and I will be out there May 4th, Sunday, May 4th, doing an instrumental workshop, and then also leading a community dance party with Avia Moore. And the night before, May 3rd, Brivele is performing, and I'll be there hanging, and I'm just really excited to actually see these people in person so soon after we talk. As always, we could use your help making this podcast push towards sustainability. We're getting close. By giving us some of your funds at patreon.com/radiantothers. That's patreon/radiantothers. And of course, please just always tell everybody about us, sing our praises, and you can do that directly to us or all over social media or wherever you talk to people, maybe even in real life. Great. So Vancouver coming up, album coming up. Without further ado, here's my conversation with the band Brivele.
Marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray are touched with all the radiance that a sudden sun discloses. For the people hear us singing, bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching, we battle to for men. For patriarchy hurts us all, and it has got to end. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, marching,
welcome back to another episode of Radiant Others, a klezmer music podcast. And I'm here with the great band from Seattle, Brivele. Hey, everybody.
Hi.
So I think this would be a great chance to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the band. And I know that you have a new album. It's your third album that's coming out really soon on Borscht Beat. And I swear we are not just a PR shill for Borscht Beat.
But you kind of are.
It's not our fault. There's just no one else putting out a lot of Yiddish records right now. So shout out. And of course, we have an interview with Borscht Beat founder Aaron Bendich that you can go listen to. But for right now, Brivele.
Hey.
Hi.
We love talking with you, so it's really good to be here.
Yeah.
And
who are you?
Maya Brown. And we are in fact sitting in a living room in Seattle on Coast Salish Duwamish land. And we spend a little bit of time acknowledging that the Duwamish people are actually not federally recognized currently, which means that they face a lot more barriers than most indigenous communities on Turtle Island. So we're glad to have safe passage here, and also take a look and see what you can do if you're also on Duwamish land. Real rent is one thing that you can do. Yeah, we're in a band together.
And I'm Stephanie Brendler. And we play in Brivele. We've been playing together since 2017, I think.
Yeah.
In 2017, early 2017, I got this email from Maya that was like, hey, no, I didn't get an email from Maya. I got an email from someone else being like, did you get Maya's email wanting to start a Yiddish folk punk band? And I said, no. Why didn't I get that email from Maya? And so then I berated Maya for a little while. And then she was like, well, it's because you actually know how to play instruments and we thought you would be bored.
Yeah. I was like, of course I didn't invite Steph to my living room because we were just going to play some music in my living room where we currently are. So I guess we're in the origin story now. Steph's a professional musician. Why would we invite Steph? So that's the actual origin story of Brivele, is that Steph was not invited because Steph was considered too cool at the time.
I was like, this is the band of my dreams. Let me play, please.
Yeah.
So,
and here you are 3 albums later.
Yeah.
In especially in response to what you said, I'll say that in Philadelphia here, we're on Lenni Lenape land. At least that's what I learned in 4th grade. And alongside the other things that then had to be corrected at least 3 times later, But that's that, and maybe that'll even end up back in the conversation somehow. But for now, it's what was fun was we had the duo Fran and Flora on, and they were just releasing their second album, and I was thinking for them it was what's different about a second album than a first album, and I was gonna start with what's different about a third album than it's first album, you're okay, here's our proof of concept, right? Or here's our best idea of who we are. Second album is all right, you figure out what worked and what didn't. The third album, I think you're just cruising, although I know that in this case, this particular album has some other, is another kind of set of milestones for you all, right?
Yeah. I mean, God, there's so many things to think about. I think one of the things that this question brings up is that because we're coming out with this third album, we're also thinking about like, okay, we also have to think about our like quote unquote back catalog, like, and we have to like repress some of the old albums. And so it feels especially emotional to think like, oh, like when we were babies and we definitely knew what we wanted to be doing, but we were also very new. Like we're thinking about like repressing albums where you're like, oh, we would objectively do that differently now.
Or pronounced things correctly.
But still like,
yes,
feeling very warmly towards our past selves and like what we wanted to be doing and what we managed. Steph is actually really good at reminding me specifically that like a record is a record in time of like where things are at in that moment. And yeah, I mean, in this moment, one of the things that this record is doing is that we sort of mark our transition from being a trio to being a duo. And so the beloved Hannah on fiddle and uke,
and an incredible vocalist.
And such an incredible vocalist. You will relate to this, was like, hi, hello, like I have 2 kids now and I actually have to think really differently about my time. And so we had recorded, like our last recording was with Hannah on an EP. And so when Hannah was like, okay, like y'all are going to have to go on your own, we were like, okay, but we knew we wanted to do this album. So I wonder, like, how does this album tell that story of like keeping what we had from Hannah, and then transitioning to a duo? And I think actually one of the most lovely compliments that we've gotten recently from the rough cuts and then the mastered tracks is from Hannah. We like sent it to Hannah and we were like, hey, we wanted you to hear this first and stuff. So anyways, bye. And Hannah sent us this totally beautiful message that was just like, oh my gosh, I really like it. And I'm super surprised like how much it flows between the stuff that I'm on and the stuff that I'm not on. Like, well done. And we were like, oh, Hannah likes it. It's going to be okay. I also think it's been hard to sort of meet this moment with words, and sometimes it's easier to sing to it. And this album was certainly a transition between us as a trio and us as a duo, but we also composed and arranged and recorded some of the last songs on the album as the genocide in Gaza was beginning, and also as we were then later seeing the election results rolling in here. Both Steph and I lost a friend on October 7th, and my family and I and many old and new friends were working for months to try and get Gazans who are beloved to us out. And so we're also speaking with you, Dan, as we're reeling from like the literal rounding up and firing and defunding and the threats of more of that in this latest iteration of a fascist coup. And so the album is called Chaverim Seid Greit. People get ready, comrades be prepared, maybe friends, you're great. And I often these days do not feel prepared. And I think part of this album is like, that's okay. That's why it's in the plural. We do this together. We figure out the way through and the way out. Zusammen. And that's sort of why the album feels like both an invitation and a request, because we need each other. And certainly Steph and I need all of our chaverim right now.
Steph, do you want to add anything to that?
I had a real big stress dream last night, just about the state of the world. And it's hard to not let this get to me, but also like, if it doesn't get to me, nothing will change. And I hope that the music that we are sharing on this new album will bring some energy to people doing movement work, to really, like, we do need to uplift each other in these hard times. And like, we need joy, and we need to sing together, and we need to shout together. And doing this work helps ground me in in the culture, in the moment. And I'm really glad to be in community with all of you, with everyone who's listening to this. That helps keep me going.
Yeah, I think it's so hard to find your footing these days. And one of the things that I'm so grateful for with my engagement with Yiddish culture is that it helps me stay close to a set of, it makes me feel like I'm on solid ground because, or maybe it's being a diaspora culture, it makes me comfortable with not being on solid ground or something like that.
All of the above.
Right,
the teeter-totter we're all on always.
Yeah. I mean, this is our story, right? As diaspora Jews and as people who, regardless of all the stuff, it's like we still have to flow like a diaspora people. I think it just it doesn't seem to have changed, honestly, And so why not grab tight hold of our own power, like our own history, our own songs. And I would love to hear a little bit more, Maya, what you said about how sometimes you can sing about it even when you can't speak about it. Because for me, one of the struggles that I've had with in meeting this moment and also the moments before is when the incredibly moving to myself songs they're sort of about, they're about the struggles of their time, which is 100+ years ago, right? And, every once in a while you get a song like Arbeiter Freuen that kind of like just hits universally and you're like, where the hell did this come from? This anarchist dude wrote that in like 1890 something. And you're like, okay. Is it David Edelstadt? I forget.
I'm pretty sure, but I'm not sure.
It's a podcast. You're allowed to be wrong. But okay, David, way to get with the program.
So I love that song, but my mom loves to shit talk that song. Like when she first heard it, she was just like, God, another Union Made, but in Yiddish. Like, can these dudes stop talking about sexy girls who are also leftists? Like, can we just be a person?
That's amazing. Right. It's an example. It's like these things are rife with it. And so, but back to this thing where it's and yet, right? There's definitely an and yet there. Otherwise, you wouldn't be working on setting music to these old poems or something like that. And yet there's something, at least maybe it's just the way we're wired, but there's something that's even better. Yes, you write your own music. Yes, you write your own lyrics. Yes, you repurpose stuff, but there's, we're not making pop music where it's about pretending the past didn't happen. It's the opposite of that. So it's when it's hard to speak, but you can sing, what is it about, or, just even reaching for an idea or a conversation, what is it about, for you both, this oldness that, what are some of the things that you find in there? Because that's what I find is this ability to stand tall and strong in the face of people trying to tell you you're not supposed to be who you are or what you think you should, how you think life should be arranged.
The way that people are wired, we don't remember facts as much as we remember stories. We remember songs more than we remember the word for word of a lecture. I've had a song stuck in my head for the last 24 hours. And there are some deep cutting words in that song. And I remember those words because it's in a song and not because someone was presenting a lecture. I'm not going to remember those words word for word. I might remember the idea, but I'm remembering the words of that song. And it helps me feel like I'm part of something. That's why I took an essay from Howard Zinn and I put those words into a song. Those are important words to remember, and I remember them more because I can sing them. So I think that it's important to know our history, and we can really know and remember our history if we can remember the words and keep it in our heads.
That makes me think of a couple of things. One is that there's something about a melody and there's something about a song that once that's introduced and a part of the conversation, the text, it doesn't get to do whatever it wants anymore, right? Like a song will actually not support a kind of overly didactic, overly ideological text as well as it does something else. And I think it's interesting the way that making something a song really has to like forces your hand to be like, no, but like be beyond and underneath those things, what do I actually mean?
Yeah.
I really do think that that's true. It's complex. But the other thing is that in my other life, I teach Ta'amim to 12-year-olds who are preparing for their bar mitz. I teach the way that you like lane Torah. And always my students are like, do I have to? Most of the time. But then they realize a number of different things that I think are really compelling and interesting and is exactly what Steph is saying, which is like, it's so much easier for them to remember their parsha, to remember their reading with the Ta'amim rather than just reading the Hebrew.
That's probably why they did it in the first place.
But actually why they did it in the first place, many people think that it's like, oh, it's an ancient like musical notation. No, it's punctuation.
Yeah,
like
that's right.
It's punctuation. And therefore it's also meaning making, right? When you're laning Torah, this is actually the oldest Jewish commentary on this text, is where is the emphasis and how did you punctuate the sentence affects the meaning and affects how someone is taking it in. And so you're actually making like a political move by how you're singing the words, right? And you don't even have to explain it. It just happens. And so I think that there's something there, and there's something to the fact that I feel despairing when I'm not singing, and when I'm singing, it's actually hard to feel despairing. I think that there's something in that too. And then this is kind of getting at your question sideways, but I mean, the fact that so many of the Prolet pen poets and our settings of those poems are on this album in this moment in time, there's a really, really clear through line to our moment, right? These are poets who were silenced during the McCarthy period and after because of the McCarthy period. And who's McCarthy's second-hand man at the time? He's a Kohen. So closeted Jew, Mr. Cohn,
right,
is the second-hand man, right? And who's Trump's earliest mentor?
Yep.
In his childhood.
That guy, right? Roy Cohn, is that who it is?
I think so, yeah. I think it's Roy.
I think so.
So there's a way in which also being deeply steeped in lineaged music and really insisting on knowing the history of these texts and these songs, it gives you a very literal rope to hold to be like, okay, this has happened before. It's happening differently now. The stakes are different and the same. But like, we literally know the cast of characters before we've even met them.
Oh, wow. Yes. It's so amazing about how music, I think when you said it, when you said about like singing, it's like, oh, right. There are so many vectors of meaning, you know, people talk about acting and it's the lines between these things are different, are like both, it's all one thing. It's all human expression, but it's also all very different. But music has these undeniable elements. And I think because it's so mysterious, it's so, you know, melody, what is it? It's like, you know, it's sounds in the air that then vanish and all this stuff. And it really does. And supposedly, I think it activates a different part of your brain than speech. And so, you know, really it is vectors of meaning, right? Like these are different ways of doing that. And I loved what you said. I mean, the parallel that you made, because it's important, you know, we need to know our history, you know, so that we can know what's new and what's not new, you know, as best we can. And so we can, you know, sometimes you find a way of dealing with the same problem, like how they dealt with it before, but usually you don't find solutions. You find solidarity, right?
Yes.
And I think, but it always reminds me of like, I grew up like with sci-fi and comic books, and that was like the big escape / like safety valve. And I always felt like there's sort of like a weird, there's like an alternate history to this whole like Yiddish land, Yiddish culture, klezmer revival, and especially now in our sort of post-klezmer revival, whatever the heck that means. But, the klezmer revival was as far away from today as like the classic Abe Schwartzman recordings were to the klezmer revival. Whoops. And like, so time still passes, but it's like, you can't create an alternate. You kind of get to go back you kind of get to rewind to the place where things make sense to you, or where you find some of the resources that you don't find in the present, or that you wish there were more of in the present. And then you don't get to rewind. You don't get to fast forward through there. You can't actually create an alternate reality. But what you can do is you can apply, this is my thought, you can apply the messages, the lessons, the ideas, the stories of those poets, of those songs, of the stuff from before, of the stuff more recent, to what actually did happen. And that kind of unravels the tapestry of the kind of way in which, and especially we're seeing this right now, is how confused they want everybody to be. It helps you become less confused. And for me, that's one of the things that I do think my engagement with this world and with the people who are in it, and not just the information, but also the process of discovering information, of teaching Yiddish music, of all this stuff, helps me meet this moment in terms of it makes me less confused.
Yes. And I want to, the thing you said about comic books and sci-fi, there is such a huge, that's so important. Fantasy, science fiction, comic books, to create other worlds, to imagine other worlds that are possible, so that we can start to grasp them as ideas and maybe actually make them reality. And that's so important. I was also raised on comic books and sci-fi and fantasy, and like also the amount of Jews who created the comic book world that we know today, the Marvel universe, like Stan Lee, so many people, really,
Superman,
everyone, yeah. And like one of my favorite books of all times is The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, and how it like fictionalizes the story of the guys, these two Jews who created Superman. And it's so good to create these worlds that we want to envision. And we do that in song. We do that through thinking about and creating anti-fascist lyrics to combat the present day that we are experiencing. I mean, Trump says that this is one of the ways in which this is different from the McCarthy period, is because Trump is actually saying he's trying to protect Jews, when back then they were never trying to protect Jews. They never said that. True. He says he's trying to protect Jews, but there is absolutely nothing that he's doing that is to protect Jews. It's to pit us against each other, and it's harming Jews, and it's so terrible. And we need to create real solutions to these problems, and we also need to create some ideas, some fantasies to create the reality that we want.
Yes. And it's like, so we get to put, like you said, we get to put clear ideas and clear music, because the music sometimes speaks louder than the words. And God, there's so much more to say on this, but we've got, it's like too much for me to even summarize at the moment, but I'm glad, this is the work. And this is a joyful thing that we get to do as like Yiddish cultural workers and carriers.
Yeah, there's nothing else to do, and there's nothing else to want to do. Like, here we are. We're just trying. It's impossible to get free until it's possible to get free, so.
And we appreciate the work everyone is doing to get there.
Es brennt die Augen, finkelige Pass mit Sonn, Farben zarte Weiche, Heifens Blitten, Berg mit Blumen. Wollt der Bosse Herr der Greichen, wollt als Vorsicht genommen, und gemacht von dem Propheten. Also viel Freude für Menschens Augen, es weckt die Bänkschaft auf in Herzen. Weißt allein nicht, was es gab, wie viel Gold und wie viel Silber, Chosch mit Lobet es zu scharen, nicht zum Messen, nicht zum Seilen, es wollt genug sein jeden.
You know, I had the chance to listen to the record. It'll be out by the time people hear the episode, but it's not out now. And I think that, you know, I've listened to all of your records at some point, and one thing I noticed was that the recording quality is very, very nice on this one. So well done. That's a good thing.
Thank you.
And thank you to Brian Lindsay also, who's the dear friend who like convinced us to do our first album in the first place.
And he's been our recording engineer every album.
Yeah. And so like sweet, he's an amazing person. And also like to be able to go from like my parents' basement to a studio that he now co-owns is also great.
That's awesome. It really is about relationships and long-term relationships. You know, I think that something that's been really interesting in my life is that I've encountered a lot of people who they're not that much younger than me in terms of the actual age, but our careers have been very different lengths. So the age of our careers is a much wider gap than our like biological ages. And I just see that they don't have yet these relationships that I have where it's like, you know, I did my last record that came out with Don Godwin, who I've known since I don't even remember, you know, and yeah, all these connections that go back so far. And I think it's not about the length. It's actually about the fact that you've all grown together and individually. And so it sounds like your engineer has also sort of grown into his own artistry as this whole process is going.
Yeah.
And that really like comes into the band and all the choices that you've made and that you're making. So one thing I noticed about this new album is that you're using a lot of texts and that you've written a lot of melodies. That's more than in the past, right?
Yes. So a lot of the text come from a book of Prilip pen writers' poems that Maya has been setting to melodies that we've been then turning into songs. Maya can tell you more about that and how she came across that. Other texts come from new translations, reinterpretations of text. So just a whole variety. Whereas our earlier albums were very much heavily just let's play this old ditty, or let's like translate this great ditty, or I'll stop using the word ditty. And
Bela?
I know.
It's fair sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm going to edit that one in more.
Oh my God, amazing. There's always this like ubiquitous part of like a professional but very like relational chatty podcast where someone says like, well, obviously you'll edit this out. And then it's
you
like
always leave that in.
Performatively not cut out.
No,
so I'm just like, wow,
totally.
we had our moment. Okay, this is a real podcast now.
You're really doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the earlier albums were us just kind of getting our feet in the material and just being like, let's play some songs. Let's record those songs.
I mean, I think in fairness, where we started was knowing that we were already deeply steeped in like a radical Yiddish lineage, but that we wanted to feel our own voices and our own aesthetic there. And also, I specifically grew up as like a Yiddish theater and a Yiddish film nerd. And so I knew all of these like classic theater tunes, which like arguably are like have been very overdone, whatever that means. I love these songs. I will listen to them like over and over until I die. But like had been pigeonholed in a really particular place. And I sort of was like, because of who I was as a kid, I was like, no, there's like, these aren't just nostalgia pieces. These are like something more interesting. And so I think early Brivele stuff was sort of being like, okay, how does my like obsession with these theater tunes that arguably aren't in the same genre and lineage as like anarchist street tunes. Like, how do they speak to each other? And I think you're right. Like, it's a lot more setting our own stuff at this point, and that's a really fun transition. And I think this album has the first song I ever wrote. Like, I didn't identify as a songwriter, and I now do that, and that's like an incredible transition to make personally. And so the story of why I started writing songs for the first time is very much a story of encountering the prolet pen poets for the first time. Dear friend Sasha Senderovich here at the University of Washington called me up, I guess like 5 years ago or more, and was like, hey, my friend Amelia Glazer is giving a lecture and I think you should come. And so I showed up at Amelia's lecture, and she was doing this really, really beautiful close reading of prolet pen poetry in Yiddish that was honoring and documenting the anti-fascist struggle in Spain against Franco. And I just like became obsessed with the particular sort of anarcho-socialist voice of this crew of poets who had such an international and sort of anti-racist lens that was also so rooted here. And after the lecture, Amelia mentioned offhand, she was just like, God, like, you know, blood, sweat, and tears translating these poets for my dissertation work. And I always, when I was translating them, thought of these poems as songs, but none of like my klezmer friends will set them. And so I sort of cheekily, as a much younger klezmer at the time, was like, well, like, you know, like we could set them. Yeah. And I don't know what she actually thought at the time, but she was like, all right, well, I'll send a free like version of my book to this person and just see what happens. So since then, like I've been slowly setting them, and Steph and I have been arranging them. And I'm incredibly grateful to Amelia for that encounter.
And where my and Maya's backgrounds diverge and then converge, I was not raised on Yiddish theater songs or even very much klezmer. I was raised in a very conservative Jewish community where I was told by my family members that Yiddish was a dead language. And I heard lots of Yiddish words, but I never heard whole sentences. And then when we started singing these songs together, because my background is as like a folk musician, as a horn player, and I've played in bands that play music from different world folk traditions for the past 20 years. And at a certain point, I was like, I'm going to play my people music. And I mean, the music that I had been playing over that time did include some klezmer, but I never did a deep dive into it. And also just playing in like folk punk bands for a long time as well. This just felt like the thing I wanted to do to like merge all of my interests. And as I got more familiar with Yiddish from singing these songs, it really opened up a new world to me that was really closed off to me in childhood. And I'm really grateful for Maya for like opening this up to me, and just like the community connections I've made through it and the ways that I can see, like if Maya has a vision for something, the way I can plug in is be like, let's try this chord structure, or let's like see how we can make this song work musically.
Yeah.
I think what I love about this album is that I won't say it's the first time, but it's like it's one of the first times that I can actually recognize and personally feel that you can see our collaboration like really clearly, and that it feels like a accurate record of how much I appreciate the way that we work together, because I don't read music. And so I compose songs like with my voice, and then to be able to sit down with Steph and be like, okay, what's happening here?
And what do you need to know to take it to the next level, right?
Mm-hmm. And also just like, I think that the sort of arranging choices that we get to make with our different temperaments is something like it's a collaboration that is really compelling to both of us. And I think it's fun to sort of get to see that on the record. And yeah, to see where our Yiddish has come is also moving to me, that we are sort of at a place where it's possible to work with the materials that we're working with in a way that feels good and honoring. And I think the fact that we come from really different backgrounds and relationships to Yiddish, I think really makes us make weird, fun things, which I'm grateful for. And even though Steph often narrates us as like on two ends of a spectrum, I certainly heard like my first full Yiddish sentence when I was 3 years old. So that's definitely different, from Devorah Kost. And we're surrounded by sort of like Yiddishists and like new and old left folks in Seattle, and of which Frank Krasnowski is an important person to be named, who left out right after his 100th birthday a few years ago and was
reasonable.
At that point, you're like, all right, but he got his birthday in though.
There you go. Well done.
Yeah. So one of the oldest Yiddishists in the Pacific Northwest, and someone who like had come to Seattle specifically to like re-enliven the labor movement here. And so I had like, in some ways I have a lot of connection and lineage to like leftist Yiddish speaking Jews in the Pacific Northwest, but also my family specifically, I think like really suppressed our relationship to Yiddish very intentionally and did not speak it at home, did not identify much more with German. And so I was always told like, oh, it's oh so silly and so funny and weird that you do Yiddish music, and that as a very young child, you like want to watch all of these Yiddish films because like Yiddish wasn't really like our family's language.
Yeah.
Of course, I find out later that my great aunt and my great grandfather composed Yiddish music together in New York City. And like the Chazan Yosela Rosenblatt like would sing from my auntie's repertoire. So
Wow.
it's a funny thing to like be coming around in sort of spiraling circles to understand sort of why we do what we do and where it is that we diverge from our lineage and where it is that we're actually just sort of like finding it over and over again.
Yeah, and my lineage is keep your head down and don't stir the pot. And I
remember that.
Yeah. And I, since childhood, have always been doing my own thing. And
That's great.
Yeah.
For me, it was, I'm sort of more close to your upbringing, Steph, in terms of that. And Yiddish, nobody said we don't want any of this. It just was like, well, if you don't really do anything, you're not just going to, it's not much is going to happen. And, I'm so grateful for this community of Yiddish, global, international Yiddish land or whatever, klezmer world, to help me embrace my more rebellious side. Because it was, didn't have a good time with that. As I learned to keep my head down pretty well. And I'm, it's still a work in progress. I have a couple of pivot points, but there's actually two things I want to just go back and do a little more, like it's what they call in the NPR explanatory commas. The first, because it's like things that some people are going to know what you're talking about. The first was there's these poets. There's this phrase you kept using, prolet
pen. Maya,
prolet pen.
Explain that.
What is that?
It's a really cute name that they came up with for their sort of loose affiliation of all of these poets. And so, as you can imagine, like prolet from proletarian and pen from being writers. Yeah.
That's really cute.
Yeah.
So this is a group. Was this a formal collective or was it an informal collective?
So formal in that they came up with a name, but informal in that like it was a group of poets that were sort of associated intensely for a short period of time and then I think dissolved. But they're writers who individually were writing between roughly the 20s and the 50s. And I think what's important and compelling about bringing their work to the fore now is that largely these are writers that were written out of standard Yiddish literary histories because of the McCarthy period. So, these are radical Yiddish poets who were living and writing in times that have terrifying resonance for us now.
Boo! But yay, we have some historical stuff that we can draw on.
Yeah.
But boo! It's too bad we have to draw on it. So the other one, and this one's actually really funny if you've been in klezmer for a while, but folk punk is something that if you're like, oh, I'm a klezmer musician, I listen to the Klezmatics, I play with Daniel Kahn and the Painted Bird. Of course I know what folk punk is, but I actually also know from living in West Philly, where a lot of people is that folk punk is a world unto itself. That means more than just I'm playing folk music with some idea of a punk attitude, although what even does that mean? But it actually does mean something. So yeah, I think it's actually worth talking about that a little bit, just because it's something more specific than I think a lot of our listeners might realize.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, I'm thinking about, I remember, where were they from? Were they from Southern California? This band called Daini Gunam that was like a screamo punk band. I saw them.
We got to get them on the podcast.
I don't know if they're still around. It was like 15, 20 years ago. I saw them in a basement in Seattle.
Right, that's part of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's like
basement or backyard.
Yeah, folk punk is a lot of like taking culture and just like running it through some angst. And that can look in a lot of different ways.
That's a really funny definition that I've never heard you use. Okay.
I don't think I've ever said that. I've never said that before, but I was just like, I think this.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah. I mean, like, we call ourselves folk punk, but I think that we present our version of folk punk in a very different way than you might hear a lot of folk punk, because we are taking folk songs and we're showing the grittiness of them. We are playing them with our own version of interpretation. I mean, like the folk punk band I used to play in Seattle, it was called Tin Tree Factory, and we wrote our own songs. My bandmate Johnny was mostly the songwriter, but we just kind of like played basements and punk houses, and we were really aligned with this community of people in the like early 2000s or 2010s called the Riot Folk Collective. And actually, one of those people who I'm still friends with, Mark Gunnery, he used to work for the Baltimore Jewish Museum, or maybe it's called the Jewish Museum of Maryland, something like that. And he produced a podcast for them called Disloyal, yeah. And so like the Riot Folk Collective was really inspirational to me, and they would take just like old folk songs like some Woody Guthrie, etc., and just like rewrite them for the present day, to just make it relevant and cutting. And their tagline was making folk a threat again. And I really resonate with that, and like making Yiddish a threat again, to assimilation, to nationalism, to dominant culture. Like that is how I resonate with how what we do is a version of folk punk.
Totally.
I also think like it felt important initially to name that part of our lineage for like a few reasons. One is that folk punk really was the aesthetic culture that allowed us to feel able to do what we were doing. Like it was something, the sort of DIY, like, no, anyone should be able to pick up any instrument and make what they need to make. That part of the culture was honestly the only thing that could drag me on stage. Like, and Steph is the person who was like, we're going to start playing out. And I was like, nope, like, I don't do things in front of people. I like the only time I sing in public is in shul. Like, you know, like I have a lineage of chazonis in my family, but I'm like not a performer and I don't like whatever. And so what really brought me out, other than Steph being very insistent and being very good at dragging me personally, is also just this sense of like, no, like you get to fuck around with your culture and you get to make it the thing that you need. And also like what instruments are for is for making shit you want to make. And so there is this sort of punk aesthetic of being like, I think it's oversimplified and not useful to say that it's like I don't know, like the antithesis of musicianship. I don't think that that's what it is, but there's a way in which the preciousness of like being a musician is kind of cut by being like, make sounds because you have to make sounds. And I think that that feels really important. And it also feels really important to name that folk punk is like a community that we really value. Like that it's also about getting to share a stage with people who are going to scream their fucking lungs out and bring the mosh pit that we get to then mosh in, because like frankly we don't usually inspire mosh pits. Maybe someday, you know, Bizras Hashem, like we will inspire a mosh pit. But
no, I hear that. I think that's really important to talk about. I'm glad you're able to talk about it so clearly. Is that I think for a lot of people, punk is a sound world, and especially I think, you know, like let's take the Klezmatics. People in the Klezmatics have had a lot of experience playing with punk bands. You know, Frank London and Dave Licht connected with a band like God Is My Co-Pilot, and bands that have been around for a long, long time. And these people totally have that ethos that you're talking about, but they also have a sound that then, you know, these, especially when it comes to klezmer and punk and klezmer punk, which like, God knows I've been right in the center of that in my own life, but like I also knew that it was kind of bullshit. Like punk is not like a big oi beat or something. Like people don't know what they're talking about, actually, is when most people say that stuff, they actually don't, because they're not in punk rock worlds. And like I wasn't. I'm like a jazz conservatory trained musician, but then I moved back home to West Philly and played a lot of basement shows, you know. There's this book called Our Band Could Be Your Life. There's a great history of the hardcore punk movement. I think really shows this ethos exploding, and also is really good at showing how it transitioned from being this thing that was really about alienation from mainstream culture in the 70s and 80s to something that then sort of took over mainstream culture when Nirvana broke through. That's the story of that book. But if you want to talk to somebody in our klezmer scene, you can always talk to Mark Rubin, who was there. You know, when Husker Du was on the Zen Bad Livers, when Husker Du was on the Zen Arcade tour, they stayed at his house in Oklahoma City. Like he was there. And also Aaron Alexander was also involved in the Seattle scene a little bit when he was young. So there's some real people, some people really know what they're talking about. And then there's a lot of this word is thrown around, and it just means that you allowed an electric guitar and a big backbeat on, you know, on an oompa beat or something like that.
For me, a lot about punk is like the DIY ethic.
That's right. And whether it's like good music or not has nothing to do with it. You know, if it's good music, great. If it's not good music, fine. But this word gets thrown around a lot. And I think that it's really important to understand that not only does it mean something else, but these are musical worlds unto themselves with a lot of variety of sound. And, you know, if I'm going to go a little far, but, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine about how most of the early punk rock bands just sound like early rock and roll, which means it's just black music. You know, it's just Chuck. Someone said it's just Chuck Berry. Like it's just black music. And, you know, with a different ethos, maybe, or at its most positive, some kind of hope for more inclusion, for a path out of the alienation that certain people were feeling. You know, it's funny. It's like almost like a de-assimilating kind of practice, but for people who don't come from any assimilated culture, it's just like the assimilation of post-war capitalism, or, you know, maybe the budding neoliberalism if we're getting, but that's really, this is not that podcast. I listened to that podcast earlier.
I want to go back to a thing that Maya said about mosh pits, which is that I actually had this really like life-changing experience. It was I think it was 2011, and I was on tour on the East Coast with my old folk punk band, and we borrowed my friend's car in DC. She let us borrow her car, and we drove it up the coast. And then I dropped my bandmates off at the airport at the end of the tour, and they flew back to Seattle. And then I drove the car back down to DC to drop it off with her. And on my way down, I stopped in New York because on my way up the coast, my friends who I was staying with, I think I stayed with Ira Temple, actually, because I met Ira and their roommate at the time, Hannah Kyle, through the Honkfest community a few years before. And so I was like, hey, my folk punk band is coming to the East Coast. Can we crash with you? And so they put us up, and they were like, oh, by the way, there's this Purim party happening, and try to come. And I was like, well, that's the day that I'm driving back down the coast, so I'll try to make it. So I had no idea what I was getting into. It was the J. Fredge Purim party. I knew the Rude Mechanical Orchestra. I knew Ira and like a couple other people. Ira, who you've had on your podcast, who is an incredible person and culture maker and culture preserver. Anyways, I go to this party not having any idea what is about to happen, and it changed my life. It was like I was in this warehouse full of like queer Jews mosh pitting to some band that I didn't know at the time, where they were like, it was a metal band singing in Yiddish, and it was Yiddish Princess. And I didn't know anything about the community at the time. I was just so disconnected from East Coast Jewish community. I grew up in the DC area and then moved away as soon as I could, and have been in Seattle for 20 years now. But it just blew my mind, and I was just like, that is the party that I aspire to recreate ever. It was so formative.
You heard it here first, that if Steph hadn't gone to Purim, and it's nice that Purim's only like a week and a half away when we're talking, then, you wouldn't have been quite as interested or mad at me that you didn't get the email.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But this is also great because that's the perfect transition to this other thing that I noticed when I was going through, especially your lyric sheet and listening to the record, was how much more, and this isn't actually important outside of, on its own, but is how much more plugged in you are on, and how much more you're sort of leveraging your plugged inness to get material. You're covering tunes, you have translations by Michael Wax, working on translations with people like Josh Roletsky. And again, neither of us are in New York. We love you in New York, but there's nothing extra special about you. You just have a critical mass of people
that's correct.
We don't have. That's all it is. There's nothing there's no essential, there's nothing, it is all contingent on the actual reality on the ground, which is awesome. I was just saying, New York, you've been very kind to me this year. Please keep it up. And, but it's true that there's this thing there. But to get back to it, it's like, okay, so I remember meeting both of you sometime in like that same time period where you all started playing this together, coming to a thing like Klez Canada, Yiddish New York. And it was like, whoa, some cats from Seattle are showing up. And then here you are asking for gigs. Here you are asking for, coming and playing in my neighborhood, around the corner, sharing bills together. And now, 3 records in / 9 years later, it's, you're really plugged in a different way. You're a part of this community. And, on a recent episode, Benji Fox Rosen was talking about how he felt like there was like, as soon as they found him, there was like a vacuum that turned on. They were trying to just vacuum him up into everything. And we are, if we meet people who seem excited and ready, we're pretty enthusiastic about it, because we feel there's not that many of us, even with all of the people we just mentioned, So yeah, what's it been like now that, that was another thing I noticed about this record, was how you're like, yeah, let's use the resources we've got from this community we're now firmly a part of.
Yeah, I think like that's also, it's lovely. Like when you first asked us the question, we were like, well, the thing that comes to mind is that it's a record of, like Steph and my relationship, and also honoring our relationship with Hannah and making that transition. And I think like the other thing that you're noticing is that it's also a record of like growing, deepening relationships with so many other people, and a sort of feeling a part of an international like Yiddish land that I think, it's very moving to us. Like it feels like an honor to have the relationships that we now have. And also we have been like raised, or at least certainly I have, but I think in your own way, Steph, also like we've been raised by specifically like Salish Sea, Yiddish land. And it's hard to be visible for people who are East Coast people and like New York City centered people or like centered in Europe. And so when we've gotten to sort of broaden our relationships, in a way, it actually like brings us back here in an even more meaningful way to be like, no, like people sometimes in every generation don't know that things are happening on this coast, but they're super happening on this coast. And it makes us want to sort of like honor the Pacific even more when we have even more meaningful relationships outside of it, to be like, no, we really want to honor our elders here and what being on this coast allowed us to do and make, as opposed to coming from a different place.
And there are a lot of people who have been doing this work in Seattle for decades who don't get seen by people on the East Coast because, I mean, Dan, you came out to Seattle and you worked with my other band, Spilkus. Like, you are one of the very few people who have made the trek out to Seattle to see what's going on over here. There are a lot of people on the East Coast who just don't see what's happening out here. And it's hard for people in Seattle to make the trek to the East Coast as well. So it's hard to feel not seen, and it's exciting also to be seen by those of you who do put in the effort.
But I think it also allows us to like see smaller scenes in other places. Like we have eyes for that, right? And like we're so like just we're pumped about like what's going on in little pockets. And I think I'm thinking about this in particular because Steph just got back from Australia, but also I'm on my way to Brazil for the first time. And so my family, our flight paths are kind of amazingly vast. And so I have family who had been in like Virginia and West Virginia for many generations, like Southern Jews, which is also why like Mark Rubin and I like to shoot the shit. But I also have cousins who have been in South Africa for 3 generations. I have cousins who have been in Australia for 2 or 3 generations, in the UK, and also in Brazil. So I'm going to see third cousins that I have never met before in Brazil. And like, if I have time, maybe some cousins who have been in Mexico City for 3 generations. And because I know that my personal like diaspora is so wildly big, it also makes me like so excited about like that writ large. And so like funky scenes in Australia, like funky scenes in South Africa, we're everywhere and we have our own flavor, and that is so exciting. And I think like, yeah, the relationships on the album are like that deepening of like all of our different, you know, flavors are is what makes this like actually worth doing.
And the reason why we have a translation by Michael Wex is because he happened to come to Seattle and he heard us play, and he came up to us at the green room and he said he had a translation of Joe Hill. He thought it was a pretty good translation. He wanted to offer it to Adrienne Cooper, but then she went ill and didn't end up being able to sing it. He tried to offer it to Dan Kahn. It sounds like maybe Dan didn't get the email. I don't know. Dan.
What I love about that origin story is that then we were at Klez Canada and we were like, hey, Dan, like Michael just sent this to us and maybe he also sent it to you a long time. Do you want to play with us? So it's like, it's fun to have like been part of that circuitous route.
That's great.
But yeah, and I think the other silly piece of that story is just like when we were sitting down in like 2016 and 2017 and we had a list of like things we might want to fuck with. Like Joe Hill was on that list. Like I was like, I want to engage with Joe Hill as a song. I'm not really sure what, like how, maybe translating it. I don't know. And so to have Michael Wex come up and be like, hi, hello. I have a translation of Joe Hill. It's really good. Do you want it?
Yeah. I mean, this is what it's about. I mean, I keep saying this. We're all just obsessed with this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and that's good.
And we're obsessed with each other because we're really cool, all of us.
We are.
You know?
Because we are really cool. I know. And we want you all to be obsessed with us too. You know, the Paul Robeson, his last place he lived is like 2 blocks from here.
I know that. partially
Yeah.
because my tata used to drive a night taxi in Philly.
What?
Yeah. So he drove a night taxi in Philly while he was organizing with the Radical Quakers, doing anti-nuclear
Oh, the
work.
Radical Quakers. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure he knows some people I know.
I think he probably does. And he was living in this like crusty, like communal house of, like mostly Quakers. And he didn't live so far away. And so it was funny because when the first time we played in Philly, in your neighborhood, my tata like called me up because he had looked up the address and he was like, you're exactly like a mile or like a quarter mile away from Paul Robeson's house, which is like one of the first landmarks that I like remember knowing when I was driving taxi in Philly.
Yeah. That's that's where the awesome Spiral Q Parade, which is a really great like local puppet theater kind of community gathering people starts, and then they go right past our block. Yeah, no, it's right around the corner, and Paul Robeson House, and there's this video of him singing Joe Hill that is so mysterious. I don't know. I mean, there's something about that song. I mean, that song is such a weird, mysterious song, right?
Yep.
It's like what? Joe Hill, and he's just it's a ghost, but he's not. It's actually just a spirit of solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's great. It's like the Christmas story, the Charles Dickens thing, but instead of Ghost of Christmas Past, you have like Ghost of Solidarity.
It's amazing. Yes.
Yeah. And then like bringing the folk punk, we've got like I Dreamed I Saw Phil Oakes last night, that song, like there's so many riffs on like these concepts that are just like continue to be translated through the generations and through the movements.
Mir kommt nach dem Sicht Joe Hill, lebt so wie die. Sag ich nur Joe, 14 Jahre schon. Sagt ich bin noch hier. Sagt ich bin noch hier. Kübermagnaten haben dich heute Joe geschossen, Joe, sag ich. Bixen bringen nicht den Menschen sagt le Moschel mich, sagt le Moschel mich. Steht mir vor die Augen gehen, noch lebendig und frisch. Sagt, was mich hat, gehalten nicht, organisiert hat sich, organisiert hat sich.
And there's so much direct contact. Like, people got to know, if you're talking about folk music, we've got, the fact that folks in the Klezmatics played with Pete Seeger, did the whole Woody Guthrie thing, all this stuff, very direct stuff. But then you also have Ethel Rame, who was working on those records in some cases and did some of the graphic design. And then she's like this incredible, source for learning Yiddish folk, unaccompanied Yiddish folk song that is so important to such a large swath of this community. And like,
we love you, Ethel.
It's for real. Yeah. We all love Ethel. She's the best.
And Ethel was like the first class that I ever took at Klez Canada. Like the first time that it was like, okay, we're leaving Seattle and we're gonna like we've like, have enough cash in the bank that like we want to come and see and see if we can come play. And Ethel's was the first class that I ever took, and it was just like, oh my God.
And we punked one of the songs that she taught us at that class.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Yeah, I rewrote the lyrics to one of the songs. I put a Howard Zinn essay to one of the melodies that she taught us. Don't despair about the Supreme Court. So thank you, Ethel.
It's also, we got to have like
you hear that, people?
Exactly.
Don't despair about the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
This very funny conversation with Ethel like years later after this. And one of the things that Steph would always say in private is like, I fucking hate the actual lyrics to that song. Like, it's such a stalker song. Like, it's just this dude who's just like, I'm going to stalk this girl until she like agrees to like shtup or marry me or something. And so we admitted this to Ethel and she's like, oh, I know the lyrics are terrible. I hate them also. But it's such a good tune.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I had the same experience with one of my favorite Stevie Wonder songs yesterday, where I'm like, there's a real lack of consent in your concept of love, buddy. But damn, is this a good melody?
Yeah. Says all of us
Anyway,
to every love song ever. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's its own podcast. You mentioned this idea of assimilation, and we know that assimilation is like that's one of the real enemies of Yiddish culture. If there is, it just feels like, we always talk about these different reasons why Yiddish sort of went into its muted phase, whatever you want to call it. But I just think assimilation is just one of the biggest ones. And to say this was not all imposed from the outside, this really was not. You can also, to continue the podcast shout outs of this own podcast, go back to the Ray Musiker episode, and he's just talking about literally the moment musicians walked off the boat, they were trying to jettison all this old world stuff and get with the new program. And there's material realities that fuel the reasons behind these sort of like ideas. There's always a material reality. They needed to make some freaking money, and you play American music, and there was a lot of other stuff. Maybe some of it was hopeful. Maybe some of it was discouraging, but it was, so whatever. But yeah, so it's like you're coming from this Yiddishist anti-assimilation or like de-assimilation aesthetic. You're coming from this leftist, decoupling from like the dominant culture aesthetics, and then this punk rock thing. And so I guess the question is, what's like the dialogue been for you, or what are some of the things that you'd like, especially from the Yiddishist side, because that's probably the smallest side, like what are the things that if you went to one of the other spaces, you'd like want to scream in everybody's face, don't you know that you can X, Y, and Z? I mean, that's how I feel sometimes. I have to keep my mouth shut.
Don't keep your mouth shut. I mean, this really...
I mean, I'm not, but I'm trying to be nice too.
Yeah, that's always the question, isn't it? I mean, this might not be in full answer, so we'll come back around, but what that made me think is sort of the intersection of all of those dynamics that you're describing. I think in large part for us is there's an active underlying question of like, how does returning to and deepening our relationship to Yiddishkeit help us and help other people fall out of love with whiteness, right? Like, how is it that doing like de-assimilationist, like punk heritage recollection allow us to actually go, like, part of the reason why we might have lost continuity in places that we lost continuity is because of assigning on to a white supremacist project. And like, there are material reasons, like you said, like people trying to figure out how to be here and how to be successful, and being offered this thing after a while that seemed like it would help. But to really acknowledge like the ways in which whiteness has been a toxicity for Jews that has actually harmed us in many ways, but more importantly, that it has harmed other people and that we have like been participating in that. And so to what extent is this project one where it offers us and other people other ways, and to be able to imagine other ways is, I think, something that is always, always there for us.
Yeah, and I just want to say that is not, while that, I think I agree completely with you, and it was this podcast a long time ago with, it was the W. Kamau Bell, Hari Kondabolu thing, and they interviewed this guy, Pastor Michael White, I believe, who's on the West Coast, and he had this phrase, invitation to whiteness, was this thing that's extended to different groups. And I just want to say that Eastern European white Jews are not exceptional in this way. There are some specific things, but other immigrant groups who move to the U.S. en masse lose their language a couple generations down. They lose all this stuff. There are some specific things about being a diaspora culture that has, that was annihilated in the Holocaust, where there's very little to go back to. So you have this assimilation side, and then for maybe some other cultures, there's like this other side. And for a lot of Jews, there is this other side. It's actually totally there. We loved writing things down. There's all this poetry. There's all these songs. There's all this music. There's people in our community who are like beating down the walls, trying to bring this stuff, make this stuff relevant today, and make it available for everybody. So it's not gone. It's actually easier to find than it ever was before, and there's not really a place where you can be super casual about it, about getting steeped in Yiddish culture. It's very hard to get and klezmer music and all this stuff. You have to be pretty intentional about it still. It's just that there's just not a lot of it happening. So unless you're like, who knows what it's going to be in a long time as my child grows, and what it's going to be like for someone like that, where it will be just more around, right? Or I think you can look at someone like the Hoffman-Watts family. There's a casualness in that family. But that's like one family. I only know like two families like that. With Yiddish, it's more. With klezmer, it's like a little less, weirdly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's nothing special about us, even though there are a lot of specific things in terms of this one thing. But
which I think is beautiful, right? Like that's exactly
that's
like
important.
Your point is exactly like what also motivates us, which is like, where is our connection point to other diaspora communities? And like, I think that that's a really important potential for solidarity there, for sure. And, like my mom's a linguist. And so I grew up sort of steeped in these questions, and also in sort of like English supremacist, like knowing about what it meant, like what the melting pot really meant. And so to be the kid of a radical linguist, like from the earliest age, I was sitting in on her classes. And one of my most vivid memories is that she would have like the first day of a lot of her classes for grad students, she would sit down and she'd be like, get into groups and figure out how many languages you have among you, like in your lineage, in your heritage. And then like, how many of them do you still speak? And in an average class, there would be about like 15 to 25 languages in the room, and basically like 10 to 15 languages lost, right? That people don't speak anymore.
So let's bring it back to the question a little bit, which is like, what are some of the things that you've experienced from doing this process as people with Yiddish, cultural heritage, and then experiencing the way that, folks in our community, our global community, work, like the way our processes, our ideas, the ideas contained in the material itself? Like, what are some things that have been, I don't know, transposable to other settings, or useful to you in encountering other groups of people, or even transformative? I mean, the J-Fred Purim spectacle is something that comes from this incredible intersection of New York queer culture, Yiddishkeit, leftist solidarity, and all this stuff. Before it was part of J-Fridge, I think this grew out of the stuff that used to happen at the workers' circle, it was the workman's circle building, the Arbeiterring. And I just remember one time many years ago that it just like the floor was just covered in beer. Like it was like that scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Like it was just like an inch of beer on the floor, and I didn't know what was going on. And we didn't make it through the second act of the play. I mean, it was like it was a perfect Purim party. I mean, let's be honest.
Who needs the second act?
That's a perfect example of just like of this just being transformed, but that your story, Steph, of being transformed by something that is so rooted and yet current. But yeah, like what parts, what process, materials, whatever, what's like just kick your ass or just been really useful?
I mean, I'm thinking about eviction comp.
Mm-hmm.
I set a prolet pen poet that's on the album called Eviction Kampf, Eviction Struggle. And it's a poem that documents the like union of the unemployed in New York City in the 1930s that organized a lot of anti-eviction work and would basically just like routinely get into street battles with the police to ensure that people weren't kicked out of their apartments and their tenements. And I encountered that poem, like 5 or 6 years ago from Amelia's book. And it was at a time that was very intense in Seattle, specifically of the sort of highly militarized police sweeps of encampments in Seattle of folks who are not housed, and we're attempting like some actually really amazing organized, safe ways of having tents and places in public spaces here. And so people were trying to envision like what anti-eviction like work would look like now. And I think I sort of by accident shared like a very early version of that setting at a queer Talmud study weekend. And like one of the folks came up to me afterwards, and they were on the East Coast, and they were like, we need this song to be able to sing when we're out like building barricades to try and keep people in their homes or keep people like from being evicted from their tents. And so before we even thought about recording it, people were like, we need these heritage words to be able to do the work now. So I mean, that's what makes me think of.
It feels very similar to like how Deloy Police falls into so many people's repertoire of like we've been saying fuck the police for generations, you know, and it's helpful to know it's not new, but it's also a bummer that it continues to happen. Yeah. And so like knowing that we have some people's shoulders to stand on, and to continue to pass down these radical concepts that really shouldn't be very radical, like keeping people in their homes, keeping people from being abused by the state. Yeah, I find it helpful. Also, like, we don't need the police. We don't also need to be policing ourselves and each other. Like, we don't need to be internally policing each other. It's kind of like what I said about my family telling me Yiddish was a dead language. They were policing each other. They were trying to assimilate and to pass and keep their heads down and not stir the pot because they came from a traumatized background of like the pogroms in Eastern Europe. And they're like, let's just kind of like blend in. But in a way, we lost so much culture. We lost language. And for me, this is about uplifting culture and uplifting language and not policing each other, and not policing ourselves. And that also kind of comes back to like, in terms of musicianship, there's an element of virtuosic musicianship that's really beautiful. And that's not what we do. And not policing each other's musicianship either.
Yeah, you almost read my mind on that. And I'm so glad because, you know, I think that one of the things that I love about folk music is that there is the opportunity to make what I consider like transcendent music at all levels of quote unquote instrumental ability. Mm-hmm. You know, and obviously it's a pretty fraught term that doesn't matter. But like, you know, I'll just say for me, one of the things that I would probably want to scream in everybody's faces would be something about the way that, I mean, we're very lucky in the Yiddish culture that there's such a strong musical connection between like musical expression of politics. It's probably not true in such a direct way in every single culture. They have their own things. It's just a different like roll of the dice or whatever. But we have this very, very explicit, like a lot of explicit stuff, you know, about what people are thinking and where they were at and what they were trying to fight for. And one of the things I love about it is like the musical literacy. And I mean that in that folk context of like, we know how to make music that is like doing something, you know, is for a purpose alongside being a good melody. I mean, some of these things are just like also killer melody. And like, you know, the funny thing is that people are reaching back for these old songs and people ask me all the time, they're like, what's this one? I was like, well, do you like marches? Because they're mostly marches, you know, it's like, you know, I would probably scream something along the lines of like, you know, you just got to know a lot. You don't have to be masters of everything. Just like imbibe a lot of music to fuel what you're trying to do. That's what these people were doing. And you can see the results of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that combination of being like rooted in lineage and looking for relationships that help you be rooted, and then also trusting your gut and knowing that like it's actually your job to use this for what you need.
Right.
I think that feels super important.
It feels like a really pretty cool place to start wrapping up. Do you have any final words, Steph, that you want to offer?
Mm-hmm. You can find our record in person or online through Borscht Beat. You can find our back catalog on Brivele's Bandcamp. You can find us on our own website, brivele.com. We are scheduling some shows to coincide with the album release. We're releasing the album on May Day. And the new album is called Gewerim Seid Great. Comrades, get ready. And we're really excited about it. And the shows are mostly going to be in the Pacific Northwest. We're coming out to Colorado in June, actually. And if you want to bring us to your neck of the woods, wherever you are, dear listener, get in touch.
Yes, please.
That's right. You can get all this goodness right in your own locale.
Yeah.
All right, Steph, Maya, this is so great. Brivele, and thanks so much for hanging. And I can't wait for this album to hit the streets.
Thanks, Dan.
Und du ackerst und du säst und du fiedelst und du nähst und du hammerst und du spinnst. Sag mein Volk, was du verdienst. You plow the field and sow the grain, mending all your clothes again. After work there's still chores to do. Oh my dears, what's left for you? Cling clang, cling clang.
Well, that was my conversation with the band Brivele from Seattle. I'm just really grateful to get to talk to everybody in the Yiddish scene, and especially people like Steph and Maya, who have come into my lives more recently than some other people and become people I really love and cherish their opinions and think about really fondly. It's just so wonderful that we can figure out how to come together as people through our love of Yiddish culture, through our engagement with our own lives, our own ideals, and the reflections and the challenges and all that stuff that we find in our search for more fun, awesome stuff, music, culture, poetry, otherwise. I had a really great time with this conversation. I had a really great time going into all the different aspects of the music and what it does for us and what a scene is, especially talking about the punk and the folk punk stuff. I thought that was something I was really pleased to be able to share with all of you because it's been sort of an adjacent part of my life, separate from this Jewish music and inside of it. And I'm just glad we could bring that perspective on this music to you. So that's really exciting. Anyway, that's it. We have a lot more exciting conversations in the can that we'll be sharing with you as the months go by. So check out their new album out on May Day on Borscht Beat Records. You know where to find them on Bandcamp, and you can always email Aaron Bendich. Go check out my interview with him. So stay tuned for lots more good music, more albums coming out on Borscht Beat Records that we'll be talking to the bands who made them, and more. Give us some money, listen to us, tell your friends about us. Just have a great time. Good luck out there, and good Shabbos.
Kling, klang, klappt der Angel mit sein Gesang. Kling, klang, zerreißt die Ketten von Schlaf ins Wein. Kling, klang.